Which brings us to a trilemma. Muslim apologists have no good way out.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
If it's shirk for the rabbis and the monks, why isn't it shirk for Muhammad?
Yet again, we have these two Christians spreading misinformation and demonizing Islam. Christian apologists, like Capturing Christianity and Testify, just can't seem to keep Islam and our Prophet ﷺ's name out of their mouth. Today, these two each uploaded a video claiming Muhammad committed shirk, but the big difference is in the meat of the video. So, inshallah, let's refute them.
The year is 615 AD, and Mecca is at a crossroads. Muhammad's message of monotheism has alienated the Quraysh, the dominant tribe that clings fiercely to their ancient gods. These three goddesses are the cornerstone of their worship and identity for years. The early Islamic sources, Ibn Ishaq, Tabari, and Ibn Sa'ad, describe a pivotal public recitation of Surah 53, the Star. The Quraysh gather, skeptical but curious, to hear Muhammad speak. Have you considered Lat and Uzza and Manat, the third, the other? Muhammad continues, these are the exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for. For the first time, Muhammad's words appear to affirm the power and status of the Quraysh's deities. According to these sources, the Quraysh are so moved by this acknowledgement that they prostrate alongside Muhammad. Days later, Muhammad shocked his followers and the Quraysh by retracting the verses, claiming that they had not come from Allah, but from Satan. According to Ibn Ishaq, Jibril confronted Muhammad, exposing the deception. Quote, Jibril came to the messenger and said, you have recited to the people that which I did not bring to you from God. Muhammad was absolutely devastated, but God provided reassurance through another revelation. Quote, we have not sent before you a messenger or a prophet, but that one he desired. Satan cast something into his desire, explicitly confirms that Satan exploited Muhammad's internal thoughts and wishes, his longing to reconcile with his tribe, the Quraysh, to infiltrate what he believed to be divine revelation.
It can't be.
They can't do any of that stuff. They can't make their voices loud.
You know it's a weak hadith, right?
Oh. So, Ibn Ishaq is a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, and the other sources he mentions are indirectly taken from Ibn Ishaq's work, except one biography he chooses to exclude, which does not contain him. Ibn Hisham was a direct student of al-Baka'i, who was a direct student of Ibn Ishaq. He does not include the Satanic verses because obviously, they would go against the Prophet's sayings. Al-Tabari and Ibn Sa'ad indirectly took from Ibn Ishaq, but in all, they all derive from Ibn Ishaq's work that's now lost today. Here's the thing though, even if you found multiple weak chains saying the same thing, it doesn't really make it authentic. Like if 10 people who weren't there heard all the same rumor, that doesn't suddenly make the rumor accurate. But when we investigate Ibn Ishaq's work, we find something pretty shocking. He uses a wide variety of authenticity, some being included in books of Sahih, some being weak, and some being completely fabricated with no chain of narration. This recreation by A. Goyam quotes Al-Tabari for these satanic verses. In Al-Tabari, you find two chains of narration, which I'll put on the screen. So if you read these chains and do a simple Google search, you'll find out it only goes up to second generation Muslims. Therefore, there's a hole in this chain of narration. They never met the Prophet. Therefore, this is a weak hadith and you'll never find an authentic one with the satanic verses. What is wrong with these Christian apologists? I mean, I'm a non-Arab speaking American revert, and even I can spend 30 minutes looking into an isnad. By the way, this makes no sense because of how prostration outside of prayer actually works. In Sahih Bukhari 1077, when we recite certain verses of the Quran, we're supposed to go into prostration right after. It's called sajda tilawa. This happens at specific points of the Quran, typically right after prostration to Allah is mentioned. And in Surah An-Najm, it's at the very end when it mentions prostrating to Allah alone. So here's the thing, if Muhammad really prayed to these goddesses at verse 19, why would he wait another 40 verses to prostrate? It sounds like he was just following the verse, prostrating to Allah alone.
The fallout was immediate. The Quraysh, who had been thrilled by Muhammad's apparent affirmation of their gods, now felt betrayed. Here is our question. Why would devout Muslim historians record this incident? To answer this, we turn to the groundbreaking work of Shihab Ahmed, a highly respected Muslim scholar. Ahmed dedicated his life to the study of Islamic history and theology. His book, Before Orthodoxy, meticulously examines over 50 early Islamic sources that document the Satanic verses incident. Again, if this story is false, why would the earliest Muslims invent it? No Muslim would invent a tale that undermines their own prophet's credibility. According to Shihab Ahmed, in Before Orthodoxy, the rejection of the Satanic verses incident is a modern phenomenon. The fundamental finding of this present volume is that in the first 2 centuries of Islam, Muslim attitudes to the Satanic verses incident were effectively the direct opposite of what they are today.
Yeah, so for weak hadith, we can basically say there's any reason for it to have spread. For example, if you were the Quraysh, the top enemies of the Prophet Muhammad, wouldn't this be an amazing rumor to spread? Yeah, the other day I saw your Prophet praying with us. What a hypocrite! Like, come on, these same Qurayshi spilled camel intestines on our Prophet while he was prostrating. Like, you really think they wouldn't make up stories about him? Of course, the same people who would torture and murder innocent Muslims would find this genius. When we look into Shahab's work, which this guy adores for some reason, it mentions what I proved in the last section. Further, they were clearly untroubled by the fact that they were transmitting the Satanic verses incident by weak isnads that, like the isnads which the overwhelming majority of tafsir and Sir al-Maghazi reports were transmitted, were either incomplete or contained unreliable transmitters, or both. See, early Muslims weren't as meticulous about checking chains as later scholars would be. Ibn Ishaq included all sorts of reports in his biography, authentic, weak, and even some with no chain at all. Just because early Muslims reported something doesn't mean it meets the strict criteria that we take today. He also mentioned there's like 50 sources, but they all suffer from the same thing, and multiple reports, or riwayah, are from the same person. This guy literally disproves all your claims. So now that we know that these were fabricated, let's look at the actual hadith concerning Surah Najm. We have 5 authentic reports, each with proper isnad, telling a completely different story. And guess what? None of them mention anything about praying to idols.
Muhammad initially praised pagan deities and invoked their intercession, and then blamed Satan. Which brings us to a trilemma. If the Satanic verses incident is real, then we're left with 3 deeply unsettling explanations.
Okay, so now we're at this trilemma, but to be honest, since we already refuted it, there's no need to continue with this video. But you know what? Screw it. Let's play along.
Option A, Muhammad suffered from mental illness. If this is the case, it raises serious questions about his mental state. It undermines not just this story, but the entire Islamic faith.
So if he had a mental illness, how could he accurately correct the Bible? I'm going to show a clip from my old video. So when Allah calls the leader of Egypt during Joseph's time king, but calls the leader of Egypt during Moses' time Pharaoh, is that random? Well, in Genesis 41:14, it quotes, "So Pharaoh sent for Joseph." Yet, when we read the Bible, the Quran, and Science by Dr. Maurice Bucaille, it quotes in the last paragraph of page 147, present-day commentators ranging from Piedmont to Daniel Robbs think that, in all probability, the arrival of Joseph and his brothers coincided with the movement of the Hyksos towards Egypt in the 17th century BC, and that Hyksos sovereign probably received them hospitably at Avaris in the Nile Delta. There can be no doubt that this guess is an obvious contradiction to what has been contained in the Bible. We can see pretty clearly that this would be a chronological error, calling the leader a pharaoh instead of a king. But the Quran actually gets this correct. In Surah Yusuf, verse 43, it quotes, "And one day the king said." And we only know about this recently because of the Rosetta Stone, which was discovered in 1799, which allows us to translate the dead language of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Also, in Genesis 2:2, it quotes, "So on the 7th day he rested from all of his work in reference of God." And in the Quran, in the famous Ayat al-Kursi, it quotes, "Neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes him." So the author of the Quran randomly picked verses and stories to copy from the Bible, but accidentally corrects them logically and historically.
Option B, Muhammad lied. What if Muhammad knowingly fabricated the Satanic verses to appease the Quraysh? He may have seen this as a strategic move, but when he no longer needed to invoke the intercession of pagan deities, he blamed Satan as a way to sort of save face. If this is true, it portrays Muhammad not as a prophet, but as a calculating manipulator. If he lied about the Satanic verses, what else might he have lied about?
The Prophet had plenty of other objectively better times to gain political power, because if he really didn't care about the message, then political gain would naturally be his goal. In Bukhari 5438, the Prophet only ate to fullness every 3 days, and in Bukhari 2739, when he died, he didn't leave behind any money, slaves, or anything except his white mule, his arms, and a piece of land he gave to charity. Like, what kind of calculating manipulator lives like this when they have an entire state under their control? Plus, the Quraysh literally offered him kingship, wealth, women, whatever he wanted if he just stopped preaching, but he obviously refused.
Option C, Muhammad really was tricked by Satan. Finally, it is possible that Muhammad genuinely believed the Satanic verses were from Allah. If that's true, it means Satan successfully deceived him, slipping falsehoods into what Muhammad thought was divine revelation. If Muhammad couldn't tell the difference between the voice of God and the voice of Satan, how can we trust any of his revelations? Early Islamic tradition tells us that Muhammad himself doubted the nature of his first revelation. After his encounter with the angel Gabriel in the cave, Muhammad feared he might have been possessed by a jinn.
It's loud.
You know it's a weak hadith, right?
Jeez, man, I get it, your scripture would be considered lower than da'if, but you can't just keep using weak and fabricated hadith. Like, come on, our standard is better than that. In Sahih al-Bukhari 3, we get the actual story of the first revelation. Nowhere doesn't mention him thinking he was possessed by a jinn. Why do you keep ignoring authentic hadith?
Each of these possibilities, whether Muhammad was deceived, deceitful, or delusional, leads to a devastating conclusion. The Quran's claim of divine origin is irreparably compromised. And if early Muslims just made up the Satanic verses in over 50 sources to the point where nobody really doubted the event in the earliest Islamic community, then the Satanic verses at least prove the unreliability of early Islamic testimony about Muhammad. Either way, the satanic verses are damning. Muslim apologists have no good way out.
He was none of them the moment you quoted weak hadith. Look, if you're going to try to disprove Islam, at least use authentic sources. Just don't grab whatever fits your narrative from weak chains that don't even connect to anyone who was there. And if you really care about spreading the truth, then spend more than 30 minutes checking your sources before making videos about somebody's faith.
Challenge to David would challenge to all the Christian apologists one authentic report about the satanic verses. Didn't Aaron teach people to worship?
Well, he was involved in making the golden calf, according to the Bible. Then Solomon built temples for pagan gods towards the end of his life. But these are still true prophets, according to David.
So basically, teaching polytheism doesn't conflict with one being a prophet in the Old Testament?
No. There's 3 books in the Bible attributed to Solomon: Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Song of Solomon. And he became an idol worshipper towards the end of his life, and those books are still there.
So we thoroughly debunked Capturing Christianity's weak argument based on fabricated hadith. But unfortunately, there's more. On that very same day, another Christian apologist uploaded his own video claiming Muhammad committed shirk, but this time he uses the actual Quran. And at first glance, his argument seems a little bit more sophisticated, but here's the thing. Sometimes the most sophisticated looking arguments are built on the weakest foundations. So let's break down why Testify's attempt is even worse than Capturing Christianity's reliance on fabricated hadith.
If shirk, associating partners with Allah, is Islam's ultimate sin, why does Muhammad's behavior here seem to fit the bill? O Prophet, why do you prohibit yourself from what Allah has made lawful for you, seeking the approval of your wives? This verse is about Muhammad and Mary the Copt. The story goes that Muhammad was getting cozy with Mary in his wife Hafsa's house on her special day. Hafsa found out and understandably was freaked out, and Muhammad tried to smooth things over by promising to stay away from Mary. In other words, he made something halal, permissible, haram, forbidden. Cue Quran 66:1, where Allah steps in and basically says, why are you making this a prohibition?
The video mentions Quran 66:1, where Muhammad made a personal vow. But first, let's address the Maria the Cop story. I'll play a clip from a good friend, Dean Response, who proves this is a weak hadith.
The very tafsir he quoted, being a Tabari, says that both stories are possible. And many scholars in the tafsirs of this passage deem this story with Maria the Copt as being inauthentic due to it being disconnected. The honey story is better attested to in both Bukhari and Muslim.
Now that we have that out of the way, Allah questions Muhammad, saying, why do you prohibit what Allah has made lawful? Yeah, Muhammad is our role model. That's exactly why Allah corrected him publicly in the Quran. This correction actually proves he's following Allah's guidance and not making up his own rules.
Quran 931 goes after Jews and Christians for obeying rabbis and monks who made things halal or haram without God's permission. It says they have taken their rabbis and their monks as lords besides Allah. So obeying the rabbis and monks, that, according to Muhammad, is shirk. In Quran 66:1, Muhammad does the exact same thing. He prohibits what Allah made lawful. If it's shirk for the rabbis and the monks, why isn't it shirk for Muhammad?
The difference between the rabbis and the monks, as mentioned in 931 and Muhammad, is that these same rabbis and monks intentionally gave laws to be taken over God's law. And the Christians and Jews chose to follow that instead of what was revealed. Muhammad made a personal promise he did not expect to go public, and this verbal mistake did not deify him, as Allah corrects him immediately.
If you're a Muslim, you might be thinking at this point, okay, but Muhammad wasn't making a new law. It was just a personal vow, right? But Muhammad isn't just anybody. According to Quran 33:21, he's the ultimate role model for Muslims.
Alhamdulillah, Muhammad is the ultimate role model. The Quran and Hadith provide a perfect example that destroys this argument. In Jamiat Tamirdi 3317 and Quran 393, we see that Prophet Yaqub, Israel, made camel meat impermissible for himself while he was sick, a personal vow just like Muhammad's. But since Muhammad is the final messenger for all mankind, Allah immediately corrected his personal vow to prevent any possible misinterpretation as religious law. Something that actually happened with Yaqub's vow when the Jews took it as legislation. This shows us 3 crucial distinctions. Prophets can make personal vows without it being legislation. Allah preserved these examples to teach us the difference between personal choice and religious law. And when actual shirk happened, it looked very different. For example, in Sahih Muslim 1581a, we see what real shirk looked like. Jews making halal what Allah made haram, the fat of a carcass. They deliberately changed Allah's law and followed man-made rules instead. So we have Yaqub, a personal vow, not a legislation. Muhammad, also a personal vow, and immediately corrected by Allah, and the Jews and rabbis deliberately changing Allah's laws. That's a tongue twister. How can anyone compare Muhammad's corrected personal vow to the intentional changing of divine law by rabbis and monks. These examples from the Quran and Hadith show that these are completely different situations.
And according to Quran 931, this isn't about intent. Jews and Christians didn't think they were committing shirk by following their rabbis and monks, but the Quran says that they were. So even if Muhammad didn't mean to commit shirk, does that really matter?
Again, there's a huge difference in intent. The rabbis and monks intentionally put words in Allah's mouth, and their followers intentionally took it as divine law. It's saying they didn't intend shirk isn't an excuse to knowingly follow man-made religious laws. Muhammad did not intend to legislate like Yaqub, as mentioned before. He made a personal promise, got corrected, end of story.
Another common defense is that Allah corrected Muhammad right away, so it's no big deal. Doesn't shirk carry huge consequences? Quran 448 calls it the unforgivable sin. So if somebody commits shirk, even if it's for a short time, it's still shirk. Plus, if Allah's correction makes everything okay, what about all the other people accused of shirk in Quran 931?
So we see here that Testify does not understand repentance in Islam. Allah can forgive anything, just like when a Christian converts to Islam, Allah forgives the shirk which you follow. But in 390, if you die upon disbelief, despite believing at one point, you would enter hellfire. So it's speaking upon how it's unforgivable beyond death. Not knowing this shows your ignorance. Not presenting this takes away your credibility.
So what does this mean for Muslims? Quran 66:1 puts them in a tough spot. If shirk, the worst sin in Islam, happens when anyone, knowingly or not, prohibits what Allah allows, how does Muhammad's action not qualify? And if it doesn't, what does that say about the Quran's clarity and consistency?
Quran 66:1 shows the beauty of Islam's clarity and consistency. You've seen Muhammad make a personal vow, got corrected, that's it. Yaqub did the same thing with camel's meat. The rabbis and monks actually made religious laws, and their followers chose to take those laws over Allah's. The difference is clear. Personal choices that got corrected versus deliberately changing Allah's law. What Testify doesn't understand is the difference between personal vows and legislation, what shirk actually means, how repentance works in Islam, and clearly basic Islamic history. Far from putting Muslims in a tough spot, this verse shows Allah's immediate correction of even small mistakes, the difference between personal choices and religious law, how guidance preserves the truth, and the Quran's perfect consistency in dealing with both personal and legislative matters. The only one in a tough spot is someone trying to equate a personal vow that got immediately corrected with deliberate shirk. So, what we've seen today is a perfect example of why you should always verify your sources and understand the basics before criticizing somebody's faith. Capturing Christianity relied on weak, fabricated hadiths that don't even connect anybody to who was there. Testify, while trying to be more sophisticated, completely misunderstood the difference between personal and religious legislation. Both failed to grasp basic Islamic concepts. It's almost poetic that these two videos came out on the same day. They show two sides of the same coin, one relying on fake stories, the other misinterpreting real ones. You know, if we took the same liberty with sources as these guys do, we could quote the Gospel of Barnabas to prove Muhammad's in the Bible. But both lead to the same place, a fundamental misunderstanding of Islam. If you're going to critique a religion, at least do your homework first. Don't just grab whatever fits your narrative. And maybe, just maybe, check if it's sahih.